Hello everyone, this is Shadow Dragon from the DCUO community, and we're now about 4 days into the stats revamp, and I went through a first pass of all 18 of my characters just to get their armory set. Like a lot of those I just picked the loadout very quickly, and it was kind of based on some older version, whether it be classic or the AM, and then on some of the characters I play more, I did another pass to adjust that, like reading some of the descriptions, swapping things in and out. And I wanted to do this quick video to go over some pointers and some things that I came across that might help you if you're overwhelmed with that loadout list. I think this will help out people who have a lot of characters like I do, and also people who played only during the AM era of DCUO. So the four things I came up with that you kind of need to look at, but they're not required. This is very high level and it applies to every power. So I'm going to keep this video pretty general. So number one, power interactions. Number two, quick little hits versus heavy hits. Number three, the supercharged builder, which is a new item. And number four, supercharges. So looking at the loadout menu, They didn't really organize this in any way yet. I kind of suggested that they group these together either based on, function or cost. But it's kind of random. Even if you pull up two characters that are of the same power, the order is going to be different. So it's going to look overwhelming. In this case, we're looking at my gadgets alt, and there are 24 powers to pick from. So that's definitely overwhelming if you're not used to this, because if you're from the AM era, you just built up to the 1 to 6 things that are going to be your AM. But now you actually have to read the descriptions in order to get an effective loadout. So while these are not organized, a good alternative to that is the bracketed text. So that's what you want to pay attention to, the bracketed and the colored text on each of them, because it'll tell you what they are. So like in these examples, supercharge, controller debuff, you've got the power interactions and the different ones that are highlighted. I picked gadgets to do this video with because gadgets actually has multiple. I think most powers just have one. So gadgets is a little bit more confusing because there are a lot of ways to make a wrong loadout with gadgets. If you pick like 6 things that don't interact with each other, you're not going to maximize your damage that way. So for power interactions, that kind of breaks down to two subcategories, because you want to pick the thing that starts the PI. I'm going to refer to it as PI for short, power interaction. So the PI starter is what you want to look for. In this case, I just have one. I'm starting with Neural Neutralizer, which is a melee dazed starter. Gadgets has like dazing, frostbite, electrified, and burning. So while that could be confusing through here, it actually gives you more guidance through gadgets, because if you pick the dazing starter, you're going to want to pick everything else that interacts with dazing. So Neural Neutralizer is the starter at melee. And then I've got 2 range things that interact upon that. For all of them it says dazed enemies will take additional damage. and I've got Thermite Mind as sort of a melee or a strategic PI interaction to dazing. And I guess across everything, you also want to look at whether something is ranged or melee. So I could have gone with another starter that was ranged. Stasis Field. Now this number one thing, power interactions, is probably the most important because it's going to take up more of your loadout spots. It's also the item that's kind of similar to AMs because you're using one power to start and then you're following up with other powers. Now these always existed. They existed in classic DCUO and they existed during the AM era. But the AMs kind of overpowered them so that in a lot of cases you could ignore the power interaction and still put out like heavy damage. But it's definitely something you should look at now during the revamp. Number 2, quick hits versus heavy hits. In the loadout menu, these are the first two lines of the description. It's the cooldown and power cost. So typically something that's a quick hit or a spammer is going to have a low power cost and short cooldown. So if you're like a speed and agility player, you're going to have a lot of these. If you're a heavy hitting player, you're going to look for the high power cost items, which will of course cause more damage, but they're going to have like a slower cooldown. In this loadout, it's almost everything fast, except for the buff, which is not a spammer anyway. Like that's your starter move that gets applied across the board. So it's okay that that has a high power cost and slow cooldown, because you're going to hit that, and then like everything else, and then you rotate back to it. But if you're like a heavy hitting player, and you have things in your rotation that are high power cost, you're most likely going to be like a hybrid because you're going to have to mix something in between. But yeah, that's something to consider and tailor to your playstyle. Number 3 is the supercharge builder, and this is a new aspect to the game because it wasn't there before. Before you kind of just attacked and your supercharge meter would build out, but now each power has something called a supercharge builder, and they only selected one power in each power set. So you do want to look for that. Go through all the items that could be in your loadout and look for the thing that's in bracketed text labeled as supercharged generator. Now if you work without this, your meter is going to build up more slowly than before the revamp. And if you have this in your rotation, it's going to build up a lot more quickly than how it was before the revamp. Now the supercharged builder, if you have it in there, and I do recommend that you try to fit it in, it isn't always going to fit in. It doesn't have to be the first move. It by itself will generate like a higher amount than the other moves. So as long as it's in the rotation, it's okay. It doesn't have to be the first move. In the case of gadgets, it happens to be the dazing starter, and it's a ranged move. So that would replace sticky bomb in this particular case. From an RP perspective, I actually don't like this. So I'm going to be testing instances with and without it. I just like having another grenade in there. That's just personal taste. But for practical use, this stasis field probably is much better. In the case of gadgets, it happens to be a ranged PI starter that's replacing another one. So it's not too big a deal if you're thinking for practical use. What I don't like about it though is in some other powers, like the supercharged generator could be drastically different than the thing you're replacing. If we look at the overall, all of the loadouts and all of the interactions of gadgets, because the supercharged generator doubles as a dazed starter, now it's putting a difference in for the PIs, because it's favoring dazed over the other three that you could have picked. So in that case, I kind of don't like it, but I can understand why it's like that. Because if you had multiple supercharged generators, then you're going to have loadouts that could build supercharged like more quickly than intended, and then you'll be spamming the supercharges. So in this way, I can understand it as a balancing thing, where powers will generate, powers with a supercharged generator will generate the supercharge at pretty much the same rate. So one won't have an advantage over the other. Okay, the last thing, number 4, is of course the supercharges. And each power has at least 4, because it carried over from when we used to have 2 power trees. Each power tree had 2. So that translates to 4 in the revamp. And some other power sets have more than 4 because they had things that were converted into supercharges. And I can think of nature as one of the things that had that, because it had like form changes that they kind of wanted to put a timer on, and supercharge was a way of doing that. And of course they're all like powered up, so they kind of act like a supercharge. So with supercharges, you can kind of break them down into 2 categories. There's offense and defense. The offensive ones will be like a big hit, something you would use on a boss, or if you get into trouble. The defense ones are usually like an emergency heal or a shield. And I think some of them give you power back too. But yeah, that's another decision to make depending on playstyle. If you're an offensive player, you want that big hit. If you're more defensive, or if you want like a survivable balanced loadout, you might want the heal, because that will definitely help you hold the ground a bit. But yeah, I think those are the 4 things, the 4 pointers that I would break it down to. And it should definitely help you narrow it down, because instead of like 24 random things to choose from, if you assign one to the supercharged generator, that's 1 slot. If you assign another to the supercharged, that's already another slot. And then you have 4 to 5 things that could be the PI. And I say 5 because I think the generator will usually overlap that. And actually, while I have my nature alt here, I can kind of go over another application. Because my initial pass with him was I basically just quickly put in the old AM, and that will actually work. As in, you can go through that rotation and not run out of power if you're spec properly, and if you have enough points. But that's not necessarily the smartest decision when you throw in what I just talked about, like the PIs in combination with the supercharged generator. So initially, I had like his AM in there, and then I adjusted the order based on the PI. because the AM starter used to be this. It used to be wait, I was out of view. Used to be that, then Vine Lash, and then you start throwing in the various dot damages. But in the revamp, that's not the order you go with, because the PI is poison in nature's case. So one of the starter moves is Briar. It's that. If I did the Savage Growth to begin with, I'm not starting the PI. Savage Growth works off of that. So poison start, and then interacting on the poison. And let me get him out of combat. So that was sort of a second pass, changing around the order. And then another pass considers the supercharged builder, because what I had before doesn't actually have that. Didn't have the supercharged builder in there. Briar was the poison starter from ranged. It was a ranged AoE. And the supercharged star is kind of a reskin of that, because it does the same things. In nature's case, it's called Serpent Call. It's also a ranged AoE, and it's a poison starter. And then I could still follow up with the same two things that continue off of the poison. So in this case, it's a very similar looking loadout, and even utility wise they do very similar things, but one is a generator and one isn't. So that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, both of them hit a circle radius, probably close to the same range, and they do almost the same thing, but since one is a generator, I'm going with Serpent Call. So just an example that you're going to come across as you look through your power sets. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of share those four things as I'm in the middle of this process. I'm nowhere near like finalizing anyone actually, but this process kind of stood out to me where I should be looking at those four things, and I thought I'd share that early with you. I'm definitely still in a building process, especially with so many tunes. So if I come across anything else like this, I'll make another video. And also for now, I'm not doing any general commentary about the revamp itself, because it's very much a roller coaster ride right now, especially as I switch powers. There are great moments and there are very frustrating moments. If I had done one on day one just talking about the revamp overall, it could have been a very negative video. So I really don't want to do that until I'm at least 1 month in and have a very good feel for it, and have at least my top 3 characters finalized for both roles. And that is going to take a lot of runs, both solo and group content in both roles, and it's going to take a lot of runs comparing different loadout experimentations. So definitely stay tuned, and I hope you're all hanging in there and trying this out long term, because I think it really needs it. Like you could come up with a loadout one day that's terrible, and then it could be fixed one day, and you could come up with something really good with the same power. So it definitely takes patience, but I hope this helps you get started. Good luck building your characters, and thanks for watching.